So DJ Akademiks is in some trouble right now. For anybody who doesn't know who that is, he's a hip-hop commentator, sort of public figure. He started as sort of a journalist who was doing reporting in Chicago on like gang activity, and he was actually decently good at it because he had sources that would direct him towards like some pretty detailed inner workings of some of these like pretty young guys in Chicago who were getting into all kinds of gang disputes and that sort of thing. And so while he did some pretty decent reporting, he also pretty quickly became controversial because he was essentially dry snitching on, a lot of these goings on within Chicago. And, there's a question to whether or not reporting on it the way he was is even valuable at all. I mean, he was pretty good in terms of being a journalist and working with sources to get information that at least seemed to be accurate, but he was reporting on it in a way that was putting people in danger, and it was just very salacious because, it's gang activity, so it did well on YouTube, and he built a very big platform doing that. And then later it turned into just general hip-hop commentary, and he worked with Joe Budden for a little while, and then they both went off and did their own thing. And ever since then, DJ Akademiks has been on this weird trajectory where he's always been weird. He's never really had credibility in terms of like, the people that he was reporting on, like the streets, didn't necessarily like him because, like I said, he was putting people at risk and, really just dry snitching on these communities and using it for content. And so while he was very popular with people who were curious about what was going on, he also made a lot of people really, really mad at him and basically want to kill him because he was telling the world about what was going on in Chicago. And so all the controversy of that aside, I've never been a fan of DJ Akademiks because, especially around the time that he started working with Joe Budden, you could really see that this was a guy who was like, he was just kind of a weenie. I don't know. You see a lot of people like this nowadays, just kind of like shameless content creator who is using other people's stories and other people's, life struggles to bring himself clout, basically. So he's always been a questionable figure because of that. But basically ever since he split from the show called Everyday Struggle, he's been going in this increasingly right-wing direction, doing deals with Rumble and things like that, content deals. And so he sort of exists in that sort of one step away from the mainstream type of world, where, at least the way I see it, Twitch is kind of the mainstream of streaming. And even there you have a lot of creeps and weirdo activity and people who are, selling gambling projects to kids and that sort of thing. But then one step further, people who get chased away from that platform because they say racist things or espouse various right-wing views or just do weird things that draw scrutiny to them. So they get chased to these other platforms like Kick and Rumble. And so from what I know, DJ Akademiks for a while has been primarily operating in that sort of ecosystem. People like Sneeko and Aiden Ross, these are his contemporaries. And not only is that sort of the audience that he shares, but he also kind of speaks the same language as content creators like that, so to speak. And I only say that to, I'll point to that again later. We'll put a pin in that for now. But basically, what he's accused of is essentially grooming behavior because he was on some stream or something like that where he was talking to this young kid, this 15-year-old kid who was a fan, and he was just saying weird things to him about strippers and asking him sexual questions and stuff like that. And it's just this weird kind of like bullying, badgering thing that, when you look at it and you watch this conversation, it just seems really creepy. And then this kid went and said that he felt a little uncomfortable with it, and it's weird. You can see that the kid, even though he's laughing along, he does seem a little weirded out mostly because it seems like Akademiks and this other guy, maybe a couple other guys who are in the chat, they're kind of doing this weird like bullying thing, you know, like they're fucking with him. And so this kid is doing his best to kind of like laugh it off, but the whole thing is really uncomfortable. So people are essentially calling Akademiks a groomer for this. And I think when I first saw this, what I saw was the thing about the strippers. He said something, I'm going to send some strippers to your house, you know? And that just sounded like he was just fucking with the kid. And DJ Akademiks said something like, oh, it's like big bro energy. That was his way of defending himself. And to be honest, it did come off that way to me at first. And if it wasn't for the fact that I already think DJ Akademiks is a creep for other reasons, and I've known that for a long time, you know, it wouldn't have seemed like that big of a deal to me. But then, you know, learning a little bit more about all the things that he said, and watching some of the footage, it's definitely pretty weird. But again, my main thing is that DJ Akademiks has been weird for a long time and has even had some like rape accusations and you know, thrown at him in court essentially. And so not sure exactly what the status of that is, but I'll throw some information up about it. So, you know, this thing about this 15-year-old fan, to me, the weirdest thing about it is, why is this conversation happening in the first place? And like, what is this dynamic of this conversation, right? Because I think a lot of streamers have very young audiences. I think that comes with streaming, and it's also part of the reason for the popularity of streaming, where, you know, you have a lot of young people who are looking for something to do. They're looking for somebody that sort of seems cool and is just playing video games or whatever, so they watch hours and hours of these streamers. And that's true for anybody. That's true for Hassan or Destiny. You know, a lot of the sort of like bread and butter of streamers like that is pretty young people. So it's not that surprising that Akademiks might have young people in his audience. And then to cross the barrier of communicating with young fans like that closely is one thing. You know, it's questionable, but, you know, it also, I guess, isn't inherently out of bounds, but it all depends on how you speak to this person and in what context and at what length, right? Like, there's really no reason that a grown man needs to be having extended conversations with any young kid. And then you add in this aspect of like they're streaming publicly together, and then you add in this aspect that he is making these weird sexual comments to this kid, kind of like, you know, bullying him in a sexual way, using sexual innuendo to kind of make him uncomfortable and stuff like that. And so the whole thing is just weird. And the thing that stands out to me about it is, you know, who is this kid? Where does he come from? There's some, you know, he's apparently a known person because he's like worked with other streamers who are associated with DJ Akademiks, and that's how he was sort of in this network. So I guess that's how he ended up on stream. But to me, it's weird to be having such a close and friendly conversation with a literal kid, and then for it to get so weird. And then the other thing that I noticed, and this goes back to the kind of common language amongst these sort of right-wing streamers that use Kick and Rumble and platforms like that have these very young audiences, is I noticed that this kid was kind of talking that way too. He was kind of just like chilling, and the way he was kicking it back to them was this sort of like, you know, he was kind of brushing it off and like trying to be cool about it, and, you know, slow down, bro, and just shit like that. And so it struck me that he's kind of talking back to these grown men in the language that he kind of picked up from them. And so that is another aspect of, you know, you could call grooming. And so that's what I really want to dig into here a little bit, not so much on the part of DJ Akademiks, because I do think he's right to be called out for this, and it is weird, and it's good for him to be put under some pressure. Frankly, I don't think that it's going to hurt him that much, because he has worse accusations about him already. I mean, he appears to be a pretty abusive and just generally toxic, masculine type of person. And that's why I don't like DJ Akademiks, is because I remember him when he was just this kind of like goofy, nerdy dude who could not stand up for himself when he had, you know, people whose family he had talked about publicly confronting him. He had no way to defend himself against that, and just ended up looking like a bitch But then now he has this tough guy persona and this kind of like talking down to people persona. And that's the kind of thing that pulls in these young 15-year-olds who don't have the context of what he was doing a few years ago and what he was like a few years ago. So that's what I remember of him, but he projects this kind of masculine bravado that a lot of these streamers project. And so, in other words, he's one of these right-wing streamers who is pulling in these young kids into his orbit. And it's with bravado, it's with kind of seeming to be cool and seeming to have all this connection, and it's all hip-hop and blah, blah, blah. And so not only are these kids getting a terrible perspective and idea on what hip-hop is, and they're learning about hip-hop and that culture through the absolute wrong people, but also it connects to, I think, a larger problem of right-wingers in general recruiting kids on the internet purposely. And another example of this, they're now saying that these two school shooters from, I don't remember exactly where they were both from, but one of them was a girl and one of them was a black kid. And they both appeared to have like right-wing white supremacist views. So it's strange. These were young kids, and they have non-typical kind of profiles for the people who would be sucked in by this right-wing stuff. But now they're saying that these two were in contact. So these are two school shootings that happened in the past few months, and apparently these two people knew each other. And so what this hints at is a network of these kind of Discord chats and streamers, and sort of like one step removed from the mainstream, where a lot of these kids are having conversations with grown adults that their parents might not necessarily know about, and these grown adults are purposely trying to indoctrinate them into being, anything from a right-wing espouser of misinformation to a literal school shooter. And this has been a problem for a long time with things like 4chan and other forums. Nazis have always used online forums as a way to recruit kids and any type of vulnerable person, and that's how we got things like Gamergate and everything that has led up to where we're at now. A lot of that starts on like kind of dark, shady online chat rooms. I'm also reminded of the she's in the racial chat rooms showing feet about Doja Cat. When Doja Cat was getting accused of essentially associating with right-wingers in like weird online chat rooms. And she defended herself by saying, I didn't know who that was. I was only in there for such and such reason, and I was only just fucking around with them. And maybe that's true. Maybe she didn't know who was in there, but the point is that there were weird people in there, and she somehow found herself in their orbit. And so in just kind of fucking around on the internet, messing around with jokes, some of it is edgy or whatever, you find yourself associated with these weird, creepy people. And this happens a lot with, as I've mentioned, people who sort of don't take politics seriously, or they're kind of sardonic about politics, or they absorb this kind of toxic masculine type of perspective. They find themselves associated with people like Aiden Ross, people like DJ Akademiks, and people like Andrew Tate, that sort of thing. And so I think that rather than focusing on the fact that DJ Akademiks is a creep, which he is, and we should hammer him on that for all sorts of reasons, we should really scrutinize how these platforms and these networks of communication are feeding into each other, and what types of people and what types of like personalities are coming out of these echo chambers. And some of it is leading to real violence, and this black kid who was a school shooter, he was not a fan of DJ Akademiks. Nobody has mentioned DJ Akademiks, so I'm not trying to tie them directly to him. It's more of just it's a pattern that I'm noticing. But that kid was a fan of Candace Owens. And, almost all of these right-wing shooters say something about Ben Shapiro and people of that like. So you have this pretty vast network of people, and we all know about it, everything from Joe Rogan to Matt Walsh, all of that is publicly available, Andrew Tate, but then the people like Andrew Tate they have to be in a little bit separate of an echo chamber because they're not welcomed on the mainstream platforms. And then the same can be said, sort of deeper and deeper into these echo chambers, and especially on Discord and even things like Roblox. There's rumors of people from Adam Waffen, which is a white supremacist group, purposely recruiting children on Roblox. And they get in these chat rooms and stuff, and they just play around and they joke around with you. And they essentially try to seem like a cool older brother who can sort of lead you to a cool lifestyle where you can be in the know and you know what's going on and you're edgy and you're not buying into the mainstream bullshit. And then at a certain point, you might even decide to do some radical right-wing violence, not even necessarily because you're that radicalized, but because you are so brainwashed by this sardonic and evil right-wing apathy that essentially a lot of these kids pick up a gun and do these shootings because they're trying to impress their friends in these Discord chats. And so that's the type of stuff that we need to keep an eye on, because while leftists and anyone left of center is trying to figure out how to organize ourselves to combat what we're seeing, on the right wing, they are using these sort of dark online channels to recruit children to do their political bidding, which, by the way, is how gang violence always works. Even going back to the gang violence that DJ Akademiks was talking about in Chicago, it's always about the older guys, the unks, the big bros, who recruit younger kids to do the violence for them through various means, through drugs, by giving them money, by seeming cool, and by giving them a purpose. And so DJ Akademiks' affiliation with this type of pattern of behavior is really not surprising. And the question is really not, is DJ Akademiks a creep? Was his behavior appropriate? It wasn't, but we're already past that point. And we instead need to be asking ourselves, how can we neutralize the effect and the magnetism that figures like him have on younger kids and essentially keep them away from our children?